one way to send them out, right?
You
Just throw
got
them
it.
up in the air.
It was a little breezy.
Yeah. All right, so we just have one. I didn't hear from anyone who couldn't make it. Like I said, I know Nancy might be time constrained on the back end, but I think everyone else is going to be there.
Andy, Dottie Fulgenetti.
Yeah, I think Dottie can come in. She's the chair of the select board, so she's more than welcome to come in right up front.
All right, very good.
And Jackie's here, I see. Hey, Jackie.
Hi.
Jackie. We just need a couple more from the committee and we should be good to go. Like I said, I didn't hear back from anyone that they couldn't make it, so.
Joe Bowerman. I'm trying to promote, but it's not coming in.
I'm not sure who that is. Does that ring a bell to anyone?
That may just be an attendee.
Joe's
I
the
think,
ECAT guy.
yeah, ECAT.
Okay. Okay.
We need the ECAT guy. How are you, Dottie? I see Dottie there.
I'm good. It's nice to be a guest at someone else's meeting.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm not gonna get graded, hopefully on my agenda. We'll see how I do. Hi, Ken, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. Miss Jamie. How you doing, Jamie? I think
Good.
we're,
How you doing? Good to see everybody.
I see Dan. How you doing, Dan?
Hi, everyone.
So I think it's the only person is Nancy. I know she's coming, so we'll give her a minute or two and then we'll get going. Oh, I see Connor. Hey, Connor.
Hi, Andy.
And I see Chief Alexander. How you doing, Chief?
Good evening. Good, thank you.
So I think it's just Nancy, but I do think we do have a quorum. So I'll start by reading the remote meeting procedures and hopefully Nancy will join us as we get moving down the road. So in keeping with the ongoing emergency order from Governor Charlie Baker to limit gatherings and maximize social distancing and under legislation passed to address remote board meetings during the emergency declaration, this meeting will be conducted remotely over Zoom. Attendance by board commission members will be remote and remote attendance shall count towards quorum. The meeting will be available on ECAT. To use Zoom, you'll need to use the link on the agenda or download the Zoom application at zoom.us and create an account. Use one of the call-in numbers listed on the agenda. You will need the webinar ID to join by phone only. While conducting meetings remotely, we will endeavor to keep meeting operations as close to our standard procedures as possible. However, use of this platform will necessitate some additional meeting protocols. While the board members or commissioners and applicants will be on video and audio, public participants will join the webinar as attendee, meaning they are muted and with no video feed from them. During the public testimony portion of the meeting, members of the public can be recognized by using the raised hand function found under participants from Zoom, or make a request from the Q&A function. If you're joining only by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. If an applicant wishes to display materials, please make that request to the chair and the email materials to board staff for sharing on screen. When starting testimony, please state your name and address for the record. There is a markup function in Zoom which allows you to call out specific areas of presentation materials. As in any public meeting, indecent behavior will not be tolerated, and anyone who abuses use of the meeting platform will be terminated from the meeting. Business will be handled at all times indicated on the agenda. Business not concluded in the allotted time will be tabled to the end of the meeting to allow for timely login and remote attendance. Board members are asked to announce themselves when making a motion in seconds, so it'll be clear to the audience and minute takers who make motions. All votes will be called by roll call. When all business indicated on the agenda has been completed, the members will vote to adjourn the meeting, signaling the end of the meeting and the termination of the ECAT recording. All participants will be disconnected from the webinar at that time. Applicants will join the webinar as an attendee and promote to panelists at their agenda item. Applicants will then be able to share their screens and present their materials. As much as possible, presentation materials should be provided beforehand and loaded into Permit I so that the materials can be included in the public record. So there's my spiel. I didn't see, did Nancy come or? I didn't know Kathy, Kathy's in the back.
No, not in there yet.
Okay, well, we'll
I'll
we'll
keep
just
an eye
start
out.
with the roll call. And hopefully she'll join in. I am here. Joe?
Yeah.
Ken?
Yeah.
All right. Nancy is absent. Jackie?
Here.
Dan?
Here.
And Jamie?
Here.
All right. So we have 6 voting members, so we have a quorum, so we're good there. So let's just jump quickly to the meeting minutes so we can get to the presentations. I had sent those out. Did anyone have any questions or concerns of the meeting minutes that Kathy had provided for the September 6th meeting? All right, I don't see anybody having any questions or concerns. I reviewed them, they look good to me. Do I have a motion to accept those meetings?
So moved, Stebbins.
Stebbins, do I have a second?
Second.
Oops, I missed that. Was that Joe?
Yep.
Okay. So full on. All right. So why don't we vote on that? I vote to accept. Joe?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Nancy's not still here. Jackie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
All right. And Jamie?
Yes.
All right. Making progress. All right. So why don't we go right into the business? So the first item is the fire response time study. And so Charles is here. And so I see Nancy coming aboard, so we'll just note that Nancy is here. All righty. And so why don't we, I'll let you, Greg, I don't know who's steering the ship, but I'll let Greg or Charlie take the floor.
Sorry, had to find the unmute when I'm sharing my screen. Don't mind me.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think, you've all seen a lot of the progress that we've made throughout the study. The item of interest, obviously, that was incomplete until now was the fire response time study. So we have with us tonight Charles Jennings, who is with Manitow Incorporated. They are a public safety consulting firm, and for us, they've specifically focused on fire response time study. So, Charles, I'll kind of turn it over to you. Well, first we'll just go through the quick agenda. First, we'll review the fire response time study. Then we'll stop just for question and answer on that, so that if there are specific questions about the response time study for Charles, he's able to address them, and we can come to an understanding of that portion of the work before we move on to getting confused with all the options. Then we'll go quickly through, review the options, allow the board to discuss and perhaps select an option, and then just closing out, as we always do, just next step slides and ways for the public to learn more in case there are members of the public watching. So pretty simple agenda, hopefully, and we'll get through it hopefully quickly. Just a response time study. Charles will take over from here. Charles is with us on the screen, and I'll let him go through his background a little bit, but this is who we've always used for fire response time studies. We have a great deal of respect for him and the work he does. And from that, Charles, I'll let you take over.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. and to the committee members and any select board members, and of course all the other municipal officials and members of the public. My name is Charles Jennings. I'm the principal and co-founder of Manitou Incorporated. And as Greg had indicated, we've worked together with Castle Booze for, I know it's over 10 years. I didn't, as I was putting this together, it's probably longer than that, but we have a specialist capability in fire and EMS deployment analysis. The company has been in business for, I guess, 23 years now. And we've used GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and done this kind of work throughout that time. We've worked in 22 states, 3 provinces. We've gone from single station departments to countywide and major metro departments serving communities of, over 500,000. So I, as the principal, work on this project with our GIS and data analyst. And my background, real quickly, I have a doctorate in city regional planning. I'm a chief fire officer designee, and I had a fire service background, including serving as an acting chief of a career department. I'm a fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers, co-editor of Managing Fire and Emergency Services. That's the ICMA's Green Book, and 20 plus years operational experience. So that's Manitou. Next slide. So the scope on this project was tailored, very specifically to the situation at hand, which was essentially to evaluate the different options with regard to response time. And then implicit in that was to consider the positions of personnel and apparatus across those stations. And we did that obviously in close consultation and with the support of Chief Alexander and the fire department. And so we can go to the next slide. Telling you what you already know here. These are your existing facilities. And I know by this point you've heard chapter and verse in terms of the architectural and engineering review. So I will not repeat that. Just laying out on the right side of the slide as you see it are the existing 3 fire station locations. And you see the staffing below there and apparatus. So Station 1 has the engine, a ladder, and an ambulance, or rescue as you call them. Station 2 has 2 firefighters and an engine, and Station 3 has 2 firefighters, and that station cross staffs, meaning that it can either operate an engine or they can operate a rescue. And so when one of those pieces is staffed, the other one is unavailable. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide. We can move forward. So the station location alternatives, and as I'm glad to hear from other people on the call that they do seem a little confusing, but we simplified these with regard to just looking at the fire station locations, and they really do drop out and get much more clear. And so we started, however, with the existing situation, which we just called scenario A, which is the current 3 stations, assuming that personnel are available. And an important point that we modeled in the study is reflecting the reality that Station 3, by virtue of only having 2 personnel, is often empty when that predominantly when the rescue at that station, the ambulance is unavailable on a call, that station sits empty. And so there are some implications for response time as a consequence of that. And so it's important to bear that in mind as we evaluate alternatives as we go forward. So next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is the on the left is the existing 3 stations as they are today. And what we're looking at here is a 5-minute drive time. This is not total response time. This is just the amount of time it takes. You open the door, you step on the gas, and how far can you get in 5 minutes? And so this represents the ability to serve the community from those existing stations. Just looking real quickly at that, the town's geography is fairly irregular and it's kind of asymmetrical in terms of the way it's been developed, and certainly the street network. And so you can see the coverage there, and at 5 minutes, each of the stations pretty much gets to at least one of the nearest town border, and which is where we would normally end consideration of how far they can go and what areas they can serve. Importantly here, on the right side of your screen, you're seeing the same stations, but this is reflecting the situation in which Station 3 is out on a call. And through the analysis that we did, that station is empty over 20% of the time. And so when that station is empty, you see the response has to come from stations 1 and 2, and there's a big open area there beyond the 5-minute drive time as a consequence of that. And so the reality is that your coverage is somewhere between these two pictures on a day-to-day basis. And so that's as I said, we'll discuss that in the coming slide. Go ahead, Greg. So despite all the different scenarios, 3 of the scenarios essentially have the fire operational response occurring from the same 2 locations. And so this map, even though they're all captioned separately, it's essentially identical. And so we see the 5-minute drive time from the 2 stations under these options 1, 3A, and 5A, provides good coverage. It's not identical to the coverage with 3 stations, but that it is still quite good in terms of a 5-minute response. If we can look at the next slide. And this is the option where the second station, Station 3, or what's today's Station 3, is located on the Gill property. And what you will discern there, and really, if you toggle back and forth between these, it can be useful, but we're not going to. Okay, well, there you go. By being up a little further to the north, you'll see that the coverage extends out to the northwest, and it very, very slightly retracts, although you'll see you're still able to get to the town boundaries on the south end within 5 minutes from that location. Now, what we're looking at here is just a graphical representation, and it's important to bear in mind that this is not the definitive way to make a determination on where the facility should be located. We also want to look at these against workload and geographic population, et cetera, coverage within the town, which is what we do. So before we go to the next slide, because I know everybody will gloss over with it, see all those numbers, we basically take this 5-minute boundary, and then we sweep up historic numbers of incidents within that area, as well as looking at population, road miles, and housing units. And so each of those are different dimensions upon which you can assess the quality of coverage from a given set of station locations. And so it's important to do that because this gives you a quantitative means to compare alternatives, and also reflects, for example, the density of calls for service. And so calls are not uniformly distributed across the town, and therefore, all things being equal, you would want to put your stations in closer proximity to the areas of higher activity, because they're going to be able to serve more calls more quickly or in less time than you would otherwise. So Greg, if we can go to the next slide. So I know there's a lot on here. Essentially, what we've done here is we put all the options in the far left column, the number of stations, and then we look at, on the top line, that's the total for the entire town. And then for each of the scenario, we look at the percentage of cover for each of those criteria. So we look at it in terms of square miles covered, percent of the town, percent of town beyond the drive time that we've selected, percentage of the population served, percentage of the road network covered, road network corresponding to really much more closely to development for the most part, number of addresses, and then geocoded incidents, which is where your activity is located. And so if we look there, you will see when we have the existing 3 stations, the very top line, and then when we have the existing 3 stations with no unit available at station 3, which is the case over 20% of the time, you'll see there's a reduction in coverage from those across all those dimensions. When we're looking at the various options being considered, all of which are 2-station options, you will see that these options actually improve coverage relative to your current situation when station 3 is unavailable. And as we looked at those maps previously, it's a fairly small difference. And really from a decision-making standpoint, all of the options you've got there, options 1, 3B, 5A, and 5B, are essentially equal from a response time perspective. And they all provide, in our professional judgment, a good coverage for the town and improve the efficiency with which the department can operate, because it gives them more flexibility by having their personnel together to be able to move around between apparatus and respond to kind of conditions as they emerge. So one station doesn't go empty on your first call. Next slide. So to wrap all that up, as we said before, over 20% of the time, station 3 is empty. There's no one there. And when you, as we saw in those that analysis, there's a big drop off between stations 1, 2, and 3, and when station 3 is empty, there's a considerable reduction. So with the 2-station scenarios and the ability to staff both stations for essentially 2 units, you gain more efficient coverage, you maintain those response times, and I think most importantly, you increase the stability of service by being able to maintain that better level of coverage, even with 1 unit out of service, which is quite common across the town. And then, of course, you've got a more manageable number of facilities to deal with in terms of upgrades and architectural improvements. And so, as we had indicated in the last slide, we feel that any of the scenarios that you have under consideration are essentially indistinguishable from a response time perspective. And so all of them we feel are appropriate and equal. So that concludes my formal presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Maybe we could do this. Greg, is it possible to take down the presentation? That way I can kind of see everybody across the board. Perfect. I think maybe what will make most sense is we'll just go down the list of MBC folks, and if you have a question, you can ask it. If not, you can pass, and then we'll kind of circle back. So I guess I'll start out. Charles, I just have one question. That you have the 5-minute response, and that's kind of the guideline. Are there any guidelines at kind of the high end, like an unacceptable response time? Is there one that says like after 12 minutes, or is there a high end that's unacceptable for a response like this?
Well, I mean, there are, first of all, there are the national standards. Generally 8 minutes is in from a, and that's like the American Heart Association in terms of timed intervention and a cardiac arrest. But 5 minutes is a very is within the realm of what most communities are doing. That is not a average response time for all your incidents because the incidents vary across the entire town. But you were in that 5 to 6 minute, 5+ minute average response time now for your medical and your fire incidents. And we look at those across, and in the report, there's a fairly detailed breakdown, but those are the big numbers and those are the ones that are most determinative of your overall service level.
Great, thank you. Joe, did you have any questions? I'll just go right down the list.
My question would be, so say we went with the Gill and Dailies.
Mhm.
The schools are right in the middle. What is that? Which station is closer, or what is the response time to that?
I would defer to the chief on that one in terms of where that boundary, I mean, it's basically a halfway point, but go ahead, chief.
Yeah, I think we would have to take a close look because it is going to be really close which one's better because you're going to have daily coming down Main Street, downtown's obviously a little bit slower travel speeds, and then see what the travel would be from Gill. But we would make those as part of the process going forward to figure out which would be best.
Okay.
And just in terms of congestion in schools, obviously the Station 1 right now is really in a tough spot in terms of being right in the middle of the campus.
Part of this whole exercise, if going forward, we would have to redistrict the whole town. So that we're working with SEMREC to figure out what station goes where and with what trucks, when what certain trucks are available or not. So there's a whole process that would have to take place. It's lengthy, but it would be a good problem to have if we go forward with this project because it'll also let us refresh our districts relative to the town's growth in recent years as well. So it's a very positive exercise in the end.
And Chief, if I could just add, that equally distant, from the schools is, a challenge in determining what one responds, but it's also a real benefit because you could really respond from either station. So, we know that, Station 3, for example, that rescue is out about 20% of the time. You're going to have to respond from the other station with a rescue to the schools inevitably. And so having those equally distant and within that, well within that 5-minute range from either station is a real benefit, I think, to these options, should you have an incident at the schools.
Yeah, and that's part of our take on it too, because we're kind of going a little bit to the outer portions of the town, so we could pick up the further, more distant points. But coming into the center, we're really robust around a lot of our growth in the center, because both stations would come in. So for anything significant, we would roll out of both stations and provide a robust response downtown.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Ken, any question?
No, I'm good. I thought it was pretty much what I expected.
All righty. Nancy, any question?
I have no question.
Okay. Jackie, any questions for Charles?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. When you looked at the response times, are you looking at different times of the day and different days of the week? How does that work?
We do assess overall. We look at the time of day, day of week, but the reality is, the station locations are fixed, right? And so they're not going to vary based on, kind of day-to-day characteristics. Obviously, the street network and the ability to access it is important, but that's really a site specific. And so, for example, like if we were looking at if Station 1 wasn't there now and that was an alternate site that we would evaluate, we would have flagged that to say, hey, look, you've got a site that during school, mornings and evenings, it's probably going to be a significant reduction in travel speed to get out of there. But the system is fairly robust if you look at it in terms of 24/7, 365, where those facilities are located. And so we do factor that in, but ultimately it's a kind of an aggregate coverage for the workload across the year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Dan, did you have a question? Any questions?
Not yet.
Okay. Jamie?
No, thank you.
Alrighty. Maybe I'll just throw it out to the rest. Connor, I don't know if you had any questions. You've probably heard this all before.
I haven't heard it directly from Charles, but we've been looking through a lot of this as a team for a while. So no, Charles, I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
All right, and Dottie, I didn't know if you had any questions. Are you good with that?
No, I appreciate the presentation, and I think it was really clear to the layperson like myself how this worked and how the response times impacted positively, especially having the two stations, like you said, having a robust presence in the center, but also being able to reach all ends of the town. I couldn't really visualize it as much until I saw this presentation. So thank you.
And I don't know if anyone else had a question. I know Chief Alexander, you probably heard it all. So I don't know, Chief Boone or Dave, I don't know if, are you good with everything? All right.
Yeah, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think I
Likewise.
missed anyone.
Thank you.
All right, Charles, we appreciate it very much. That was great to see. I know we saw a little bit before, but it was good to see kind of the final numbers there. So,
Sure. Well, and I'll just stand by just in case something comes up. So
oh, absolutely.
I'll stay on the line. Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right, Greg, do we want to move to the second meeting agenda about the options?
Sure. Sorry, and can everybody see me again? Yes. Great. So just to go back a little bit through the timeline, we've kind of checked off a lot of the boxes. So we're here at the NBC meeting to pick a preferred solution that would move into SD, and hopefully you're able to come to a decision on that tonight. And then as SD kind of gets into gear, that's when we really start to develop kind of the buildings, what the buildings look like, floor plans, elevations, things like that, in order for the design to develop and ultimately come to a project scope and budget in April, where we would have a really defined scope of the project and a budget number that you could take back to the community at large for approval in that perhaps summer town special election, special town meeting. So we're on track for those things. They will be following this meeting. There will be a formal report that all of the kind of information you've seen and taken in gets kind of compiled in, that will go along with all of your records to date, just to summarize the process and put into a formal document the procedures, all the facts and figures that were done to get us to this point. So I'm stealing Chad's slide here, but this is kind of where we're at. We're right toward the end of the feasibility study. We will roll into schematic design, and then ultimately we're looking, if approved at town meeting at an April to August district approval, and then August of 23 to July of 24 for kind of detailed design. That would be up to the end of design, and then the project would go out to bid and ultimately construction. So that's kind of the big picture timeline should the project move forward. We'll see how we progress through that, and we can always come back to that as the project moves forward. So we're on October 4th here, obviously, schematic design. February would be schematic design estimating. March, we would be looking for the NBC approval on the schematic design scope and budget. And then in June of 23, that's around the time that the town is targeted for funding approval. And I'll run through the options quickly. I will try to be brief. Again, master programming was completed, and we will recap the total program square footage at the end of each option. So 32,500 square feet for police, 39,000 square feet for the main fire station. And then depending on the option, the square footage on either a renovated Station 3 or a new fire substation changes slightly, just so we can bring that, that new building up to modern standards that we wouldn't necessarily do on a renovation. And then in Public Works, one consolidated station, about 59,000 square feet. That also would have a salt shed and a yard for materials, get your fleet in undercover. And it would also have shared vehicle wash facilities for the entire town department. So the options, if you remember, were here. So 8 options in total. You selected options 1, 3B, and 5B for further exploration. As Charles mentioned, we did also look at option 5A in the fire response time study, just to make sure that it was the same as you requested earlier on. So even though we didn't explore that architecturally or estimating wise, we do have the data in hand, so that we know that those responses would be similar to options 1 and 3B. So just to recap, option 1 is a new police and fire combined at Daly's Corner, a new DPW at Gill property, and a renovation at Fire Station 3, which would become a substation. The advantages obviously are that fire and police are in the same building together at Daly's Corner. DPW gets combined, so all of DPW's departments get combined at Depot Street at the Gill property, and that property has sewer. This consolidates the fire stations from 3 to 2. Obviously, all of the options that were selected do that. There are some challenges with this option. There are 3 locations for projects, so there are going to be 3 separate projects kind of going on, whether they're one project or 3 separate projects. There are 3 separate sites that you're dealing with to do the project. The land would need to be procured from Stonehill for the Daly's Corner. I know the town has made significant strides toward that end, and there's still a process that has to be followed for that, but it seems like that is a viable option for the town. Daly's Corner is a little bit less centralized for police, so even though police are responding from the road in their districts, to come back to the station is just a bit less centralized than some of the other options. And the configuration of Daly's Corner is a little bit limiting in the fire and police, just based on some site constraints that we have on that site. You'll see them in a minute. And DPW and Public Safety Administration stays on separate sites. Ultimately, I think the town would like it if they could be on the same site, and it worked out. So running through option 1 at Daly's Corner, police and fire combined. So as you can see, a little bit tight in the site. It would cause us to go a little bit more vertically with the building, and it limits kind of the access in and out of that site to basically one side of the site. And then for DPW at the Gill property, DPW would be located back down, off of Depot Street on the Gill property. This would allow for some future municipal use. It would take up slightly less than the 10 acres allowed, but centralized fueling station operations for all municipal vehicles would be here, with the DPW in the back, offices, shops, maintenance, vehicle washing, fleet storage, and a potential trailhead for the remainder of the Gill property that is set aside for recreational purposes. Option 3B, similar, a new police and DPW at Gill property, and then a new fire headquarters at Daly Corner. So the police moved from Daly's Corner to the Gill property with DPW, and Fire Station 3 is renovated again into a substation. So the advantages obviously are that the new fire station on Daly's Corner is accessible to North Easton, so it takes care of that fire response that we were looking for, similar to option 1. It centralizes DPW and police operations with sewer. That's helpful. consolidates two fire, the fire stations into two fire stations, and it provides for that better staffing that we talked about with the response time study. And the challenges here are similar, 3 site locations, procurement of Daly's Corner, and the fire administration remains, separate from the other 2 departments. And just a bit what that looks like. So still on Daly's Corner, because this is the main fire station, or the fire headquarters, I should say, administration's here, it's a little bit bigger. So it's still fairly tight on this site, not, still workable, but it's a little bit tighter than we would like. Fire apparatus in the center, administration on one side, bunks on the other. And then on Gill property, police up in front, DPW in the back. So that front portion of the Gill property would be, developed here. And this would essentially take up the whole 10 acres that you're allowed to take up, maybe slightly less, but there wouldn't likely be room to develop anything else on the property. On option 5B, so new police and fire headquarters, so a combined public safety building at Gill property, and a new fire substation at Daly's Corner, and then a new DPW at Gill property. So, the DPW stays essentially the same throughout the 3 options, and the public safety tends to move around a little bit more. So the advantages are all 3 departments are consolidated onto one site. It consolidates the fire response into 2 stations. The centralized location with the rest of the town for the Gill property site is particularly helpful. It is kind of pretty close to the geographic center of town and along a major thoroughfare. The current fire station at Bay Road, as well as the water department parcels adjacent, would be available for another use or reuse. So that's a kind of a benefit that this option has, that the other options only have the potential of the water department being, or the water division, sorry, being available. And this option limits the work to 2 sites. So instead of projects going on 3 sites, it limits the work to 2 sites. And really the only real challenge is the procurement of Daly's Corner. We've talked a lot about the sewer benefits on Gill property. This really kind of consolidates that benefit into one project on that site. So again, what this looks like conceptually, this would be public safety up front. So very similar to what you saw on Daly's Corner, would move here and be on Depot Street, and in back the same arrangement for the DPW with fueling in the middle. And again, that potential trailhead. So all of these options have the potential to have that for the recreation on the Gill property. And then here on Daly's Corner, a much tighter site development within Daly's Corner, because we're working with just a much smaller building for the fire substation. So still an adequate fire substation will get you everything you need for response for the appropriate staff in that station, and all of these options build in room for expansion, the appropriate amount of expansion as the town grows. This site would always have a preemption light, and likely the same at Gill property. So those kind of concerns about exiting out onto Main Street would be resolved. This does have a septic field. So this option just kind of shrinks that a little bit, as it's a much smaller development footprint. And then Chad, I'll toss it to you on kind of the cost comparison that you did for these options.
Thanks, Greg. So from the last time we met, everyone remembered that we kicked off these options and scenarios to 2 independent estimators. We had them put construction cost estimates, and one of the action items that came out of the last meeting was to roll that into what a total project cost might look like, so we could have a basis for comparison between the options. So this factors in items like working in a renovation scenario, or the swing space options, or the delivery method. So your delivery method is likely going to be different for a renovation or an ad rental than it would be for a new build. New build is a little bit cleaner, so it lends itself more to a hard bid. So factoring all that in, this is really where we landed. The red bar on the top is sort of the margin of error for the estimate. So we had two different estimators. We're very high level, so those two estimators are never going to agree 100%. So that red bar really represents that margin of error between the two estimators once they're reconciled. This is one of those instances where all of the costs are really pretty well aligned. The margin of error spans across all four projects and really puts them in the same cost category at this very high level. Generally, when we see this, cost is not going to be your primary driving factor. And our recommendation would be to proceed with the best long-term solution for the town of Easton, because you are within that margin of error and cost estimates. If we jump over to the next slide, we can put some hard numbers to this and you'll see sort of that range and what it looks like. So options 1 and 3B. 3B is a little bit larger. 3B and 5B are on the same, 138,000 square feet. You can see that delta figure down on the bottom. So options number 5B, the two estimators were furthest apart, but the low end of option 5B is potentially less than the high end of option 1 and option 3B, which is why I say that cost should not really be the driving factor in this decision at this point. Happy to answer any cost questions, Greg. I think you have a couple more slides to run through, and then we can open it up for Q&A after that. I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. And really, that's kind of the summary slide that we can come back to, as you deliberate, just learning more next steps. So here we're on the building committee meeting. So that's the last of our public meetings, I think, before you select and we move into SD. And then obviously opportunities for the public to learn more. All of the documents that we've generated, are on the town's website and can be accessed here at easton.ma.us/MBC. So everything we've produced is on there. All of our meeting slides are on there, along with great videos of Director Field, Chief Boone, and Chief Alexander and I giving tours of the buildings. So if there are any questions on that, obviously there's also a way to ask questions through the website, I believe, Connor.
Yes, our contact information is there. Folks can submit questions to me or Dave Field at any time about the project. I just want to note for the committee's benefits. So when we kind of laid out the engagement calendar back in August leading up to tonight, we mapped out roughly 6 to 10 events. And so starting with August 22nd, we had a very lengthy and comprehensive presentation of the select board. After that, we did 3 additional public meetings, 2 more with general updates to the select board, as well as a similar comprehensive presentation of the finance committee, where we invited the chairs of all board and committees in Easton to the meeting to watch and participate if they would like. We also did 4 community events with the YMCA, the Lions Club, the National Resources Trust Harvest Festival 2 days ago, as well as with Furnace Village Neighborhood Collaborative down at 5 Corners. We filmed 2 different sets of video tours, and we offered 2 nights of in-person tours, although we had no takers, but we are getting some engagement on the videos. So, close to a dozen events in the past 6 weeks. We were slated to potentially be at the Borderland Fun Day, but given it's after your selection of Schematic, and we only had 3 slots out of 8 picked, we're going to cancel that. We feel we've really kind of covered a huge amount of ground on that. But I just wanted to give that update. Obviously, as after you make a choice tonight and you all move into schematic design, there will be many months ahead, particularly once we get better ideas on cost. That was kind of a persistent feedback we got regardless of our audience, which was, okay, this seems to need to happen, but what's the real estimate on cost? And so I think that once we start getting there in the late winter or spring next year, we can kind of do another big push. But appreciate everyone, the staff and folks and the members of the committee who helped with that calendar the past 6 weeks.
And that's the end of our presentation. So I can turn it back and we're happy to answer any questions on the options, the cost, anything like that.
But what I thought might work, Greg, and for the group is maybe, I think what might work best there is if we kind of hear from Dave and the Chiefs first. Obviously they're not voting members, but maybe get some feedback. They've seen all three of these options, and maybe each one of them can kind of give us some pros and cons, as they're the ones who are going to live in these buildings. So Dave, why don't you start with you?
Sure. Good evening. So I think from the DPW perspective, our choice of options really comes down to what's the best operationally. And personally, I believe that's option 5B, where police, fire, DPW are on the same campus. There's a lot of efficiencies there. We deal with all the fleet maintenance in one area. We do maintain the police cars. Fire has their own mechanic that will actually work out of the new facility. So having that close is a huge help. And then we also have the vehicle fueling and the vehicle washes. So that's great. And then the operational awareness and the proximity for emergencies and storm events. I think that is, again, my preference would be 5B.
All righty. Maybe Chief Boone, do you want to chime in with your thoughts?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having us. I agree with Director Field. Just speaking for the police, we do work very close together between police, fire, DPW, and water. And I think it's a good benefit for the town. We're all centralized in one area. We can have a community room. We could do different types of things that we could share together, and we wouldn't be spread out all over town. Again, we do work very close together. I like the idea of having access to the wash station and things like that to help service our fleet. The sewer allows that. It doesn't any of the locations. And it is on 123. It's as central as you really could be. The road's brand new. That's 5B is where the police like to be.
Great, thank you. How about Chief Alexander? You want to chime in?
Absolutely, thank you. I agree with both my counterparts about 5B. I'll expand a little on the fire response side. I view all the options equal regarding our fire response, given the proximity of Bay Road to Gill Farm. So as far as operationally, response time wise, they're all equal. And as far as the centralization of services between the three departments, I think that that's a positive. It'll be nice to be in the same building administratively with the police chief, and a short walk to see the DPW director or the maintenance facility or anything like that on the same campus. So, and also I think it's a benefit to the public to be able to come in and have so many facilities in one site when they have to deal with our facilities. And sometimes we have things that cross over. So I'm very positive around that stuff. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chief. Well, maybe I think to start the discussion, maybe we'll just do the same thing and we'll just go right down the list of the members, and everyone can kind of chime in with their thoughts, and then we'll circle back afterwards. I had a couple of questions. The first one I think is for you, Greg, is that not that I want to be the pessimist, but if perhaps knowing we spent all this time for a feasibility study, would any of, if we ever had to just do one project, is any of this work that we're about to do, especially schematic design, could that be taken, if things don't go well next year, could you still use any of that towards another project like the DPW at Gill? Would that always be there? Like, would that be something we could reuse if we had to? Not that we will.
I'd say, the results of the work would stand for themselves. Schematic design, though it has, a fair amount of detail in it, is fairly preliminary. After we go through schematic design and the project would be approved, there's another about another year of design work that happens in that, before you're really ready to go out, to have a project. So it's something you could put on the shelf, obviously. But it's not a final product, to go back into a project. Inevitably things change over time, but yes, you wouldn't be, without the work that was done. The work that was done is the work for you, and it would inform the town as you move forward.
All right, great, thank you. And I guess the second piece, and I just don't know how this all folds together. This might be a question for Connor, but obviously all the ones we're looking at, all these options are contingent on buying Daly Corner. Like how far down the road do we have to be with them, before we go to like the town meeting, or where are we now? I didn't know how that process works.
So as you know, Andy, and for the committee, we have a memo of understanding with the college where they've indicated that they would be willing to lease, the roughly 10-acre portion that we are all contemplating for a public safety structure for 75 or more years. Part of that is, I don't want to say predicated because it's not exactly explicitly tied to it, but it's related to the town's intent, and it's actually on the warrant for this town meeting in November 14th, for a town meeting to authorize the select board to put Merle Hall out to bid. And so the school committee voted in August to transfer care and custody of Merle Hall and Center School to the board only after they're vacated and no longer being used as schools. So once Blanche Ames is complete and move in, which is estimated for January. So we'll ask voters at town meeting this November to give the necessary legal authority under procurement statute to the select board to do that disposal. I dislike that word, but that's what it's called in the law, the sale. And the college has indicated that if that were an option, that a lease could be part of that bid. It would be an open bid. We would obviously be open to other comparable civic or educational bids as we have to be, but we won't. Those are a very long way of saying we're lining up all the necessary approvals, but until we actually do it, and there's an executed real estate transaction, which would happen in advance of any kind of special town meeting and debt exclusion for the project. Having the exact dates uncertain, but we're taking the steps now to get the authority for the board lined up for the predicates necessary for the lease.
Yeah, I think that made sense from everything we talked about, Moreau Hall being right there as well. And that kind of tied into my last question. I'm not sure who the best is to answer this, but does it make any sense to keep the center school parcel available to us till after the town meeting? Again, I don't want to be the pessimist. Maybe it's because I'm an engineer, but has there been any thought to keep that at least till we know that the town is willing to buy that? Because obviously, center school at 7.5 acres, that's a pretty good sized parcel that there aren't many parcels like that left in town. We were lucky, with the Gill property, what we did there. So I didn't know if there's what that rationale was, or if there's any thought that maybe we could hold that till after the town meeting.
Sure. So it's a good question, but the answer was kind of embedded in the question. The center school site doesn't do anything for this project as a hedge against the lease of Daly's Corner, right? Because if the Daly's Corner aspect were to not work out, we would need to just go to the drawing board again, because the Daly's Corner site is advantageous for its location for a fire station. If that was not on the table, which again, we have no indication or reason to think that would be the case. We're already out there doing geotechnical analysis with the college. We would need to remodel this kind of whole thing. Center School, as part of feasibility, was looked at as a potential site for the consolidated facilities on the southern part of town. But as you noted, the Gill property, which is on the same street, has all of the advantages, a better location for a fire station in South Easton, and it has sewer. So given we have control now of Gill property, right, that this one doesn't have the kind of timing questions that the Daly's Corner would. I don't see a scenario based on what we know now, and you're an engineer, you know, there's always could be something that happens along the way where we have to pivot. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen anything through feasibility, through programming, and through what the geotech work we've done to date that would indicate that Gill is non-viable or that Daly's Corner is non-viable, and that we would need to go back to Center. And if either of those did happen, we would need to kind of start a lot of this over. Is that fair, Greg?
Yeah, I'd say that's right, Connor. The Gill property and the Center School are so close to each other that, you know, co-locating two fire stations there just doesn't solve your response needs, right? We need to pull them away from each other to get them to respond to the areas of town that they're, you know, coming from the center, they're just not able to get to. We did obviously look at in those options a number of options that would hedge the bet of Daly's Corner not working out. I think option 6, if I remember correctly, looked at reusing the existing public works facility on Center for a fire substation. Not nearly as good as Daly's Corner in a number of respects, but that option was looked at, and I think as a group, the town felt comfortable enough, we felt comfortable enough that Daly's Corner was a viable option, that it kind of fell off of the table. So you're right that if Daly's Corner did go away, we would have to look for something else on the north side of Easton. There's essentially no available town-owned parcels that are developable at this size for, you know, say 3 to 4 acres would be kind of a minimum. So it's a difficult scenario to think about without, you know, really having to, but you know, things do happen, and if those things happen, we'll react to them and deal with it.
And just to add one more piece, Andy, and for everyone here's edification, in a certain set of circumstances, waiting would not necessarily be an issue, but just for the constraints we have of a town meeting form of government, if we don't get the authorization in November to go forward with these processes, you have to wait till May. Interest rates are going up every single month, and if town meeting grants authority to the select board, it's not as if they go on the market for sale the next day. There's months of administrative process that my office, working with council and the board, would have to go through to develop those public requests for proposals. I think realistically, the limiting factor is when we're all talking at some point next spring, the discussion I don't think will be centered on, did we get authority too soon? It will be, gee, I really hope Connor's office pulled those bids together fast enough that we got the ball rolling to keep up with the schedule we're targeting for summer next year. Because we do, I'm not trying to marginalize, there's a ton of balls up in the air, not the least of which is we need to complete Blanche Ames Elementary. Building has 10 days to go. I know Chad is super excited about that. But getting the authority up front just gives the board and the town the ability to proceed if and when we're ready. It doesn't mean we have to. So if something fatal came up with Daly's Corner or some kind of geotech work, getting that prior approval to do those sales doesn't mean that we would have to. So if we had to come back to the drawing board with this group, those votes of town meeting in November wouldn't prohibit us from saying, okay, well, the board has the ability to do a sale, but now we're not going to, because we need to think differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I think that answered the question very well. Appreciate that. And as far as I said, we'll just go down the list and people can make comments, but I think 5B is the one that makes sense to me. It's not just, you know, obviously the Chiefs and Dave are in for that, but it's also just 2 sites, 3 buildings, you know, and like I said, operational, it sounds like in the long run, it might save cost operationally. So at least from my perspective, that makes sense as well. Joe, did you want to chime in? Oh,
I think, Joe, you're muted.
See if I can repeat that. I don't have any questions, but I think I like 5B. I think having all the departments together is so valuable, and there's just so many hidden efficiencies that just make sense to me. So that's all I have.
great, thank you. Ken? Ken, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything or your thoughts.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right.
Interference at home. No, I agree. I think 5B is the most logical choice. And I think one thing I'd be concerned about would be if Station 3 was being renovated. I think it's additional cost and logistic considerations. You know, what would you do with the apparatus and ambulance, the Station 3? How would you handle that if that station was on a complete renovation? But I think 5B just makes the most sense out of all of them.
All righty, great, thank you. Nancy, you want to jump in?
I think the presentations were great. I don't know, I'm a little, I think the daily corner thing kind of throws me off, but all of you, so DPW, police, fire have all agreed. So I'm gonna go with the majority and say 5B.
All righty, Jackie?
Yeah, thank you to both chiefs and to Dave for giving their opinion. I think that was very valuable. And I think our discussion, not just this time, but in past meetings, I think 5B really stands out as the best alternative. I just had one quick question. I think you said with option 3B, it uses pretty much the entire part of the Guild property that we would have access to. So 5B, it's a bigger footprint, is it not? Is there an issue there at all?
No, so the full development is 10 acres. We can fit the, 3 departments and 2 buildings in on that. But when you have to develop another building there, option 3B sort of takes up most of the room. So you wouldn't really have the opportunity to, say build a school or another municipal building there because, most of the land is taken up. So creating a whole nother building that would probably not be connected to the police department, right? It just brings on another set of complications that having the fire department connected to the police department, which is a much more cohesive, kind of joining or partnering of program, doesn't. So even though it's slightly bigger, say, 10 acres on 5B, you would probably be 8.5 acres on 3B. So there's an acre and a half that you could potentially develop, but realistically for a municipal building, that just isn't really enough room to do anything of substance. So, you don't really have that option to say, find another town department to move into a new building there. You couldn't probably build a much larger council on aging or something else there just because of the operational needs of the departments and the amount of space that takes up on the site. There just wouldn't be enough room left for a whole nother facility.
Okay, thank you.
All righty, Dan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah. Thanks for your presentation. It's really good. And thanks to the chiefs. I have a couple questions. We haven't talked about Station 2. My recollection is that would stay in service and that would be used by support vehicles for the fire station. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I could take that one. So the idea is, that's a historic building that's we wouldn't want to dispose of in any fashion. And a good reuse for that would be for our emergency management and CERT staff, as well as any potential community benefits that could come out of that building. So it's a great building, just not for the modern fire service, but it has some emergency response life left in it. So it would still be part of our family.
Yeah, I think it's good to know. And I think going forward, we should probably show that on the plans or note that when we're talking to the public, because people won't see it and they think we're getting rid of it and then they'll get upset. My next question would be for Greg or Chad. Is the numbers that we're looking at, is that total project budget or is that just the construction cost?
That's total. So that includes owner contingencies as well, soft cost contingencies, and then
And the A&E fees and
Yep.
financing
Sorry.
and stuff like that.
So the first slide, sorry if I can share, just so we don't.
the borrowing costs are not in there. That would be the one item that's not in there.
So this slide, Dan, is full cost. So soft costs are in the gray here. 149 hard bid construction number in the blue, with the red being the variance between estimators right now. On the next slide, we are comparing here hard construction costs, so not full project cost. These are the estimated ranges of the construction cost estimate from the cost estimator, just to give you a better sense of building cost directly for those. There is some variance in soft costs for different options. I'd say I think they may be flat here. Chad, is that correct? I believe they're flat.
The only variation is on the far left, the repair and additions. The soft cost reflects the higher contingency that would be associated with those renovations.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, does that
Thank you.
answer?
Yeah, it does. It does. I just want to get the numbers. I do the mental math in my head and I start to get scared.
Well, and I mean, that these are very early stage numbers. We're at a fairly uncertain time in the market. And you can see, in the second slide, the variance, in option in 5B. And that's really, from what we can tell, a disagreement in the estimators between the risk or kind of value of that renovation versus, a kind of consolidated project. They just have a different take on where the value lies.
Okay.
Which is why you see a much higher variance on that one.
Yep.
That would be dialed in at schematic design too. So once we get to the schematic, as you know, we get down to that level of detail where we can really have them estimate to the CSI level and then reconcile to each CSI division, like we would with any project this size at that stage. We're just not there yet. It's too concept level. So
no, I 100% understand that. I mean, at this level, these are kind of close enough that it's, like you said, the cost is fairly insignificant. My 2 cents is that I think from my perspective, 5B would be the cleanest project, which usually ends up being the cheapest. All the chiefs, I think 5B just seems like the best option for the town, at least in my opinion.
Alrighty, thank you, Dan. Jamie, you want to chime in? Maybe we can take that down.
Thanks for bringing these slides back up. And that was it was actually answered at the end there when we talked about the delta and the 17% and why it was higher for option 5B than it was across 1 or 3B. So you answered that sufficiently. And I too, I think have been in favor of this option early on. And a lot of it has to do with taking advantage of what we've created too. The town has worked hard to bring sewer to that section of town, and the fact that we could put this municipal facility in range to take advantage of that, I think is fantastic. And there was obviously some people long before me who thought that the Gill property made sense to bring under the town's ownership. So I think we're really well aligned right now, and I think we're poised to make a really good case. And people can go back and watch plenty of the meetings that have happened prior to now, and a lot of the thought that's been put in to get us to this point. And that's what we're going to have to work on from here moving forward, is education. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Greg, you just take that down for a sec. That way I can kind of see everybody on the screen. Great, thank you. I don't know, Dottie, did you have any comments you wanted to share with the MBC from your perspective?
I also really like the option that everybody seems to like. I like the consolidation, but I also really like the opportunity to free up space from the fire station down on Bay Road in an area that we're really trying to target for economic development and growth. So having that parcel be available along with the water parcel is a real added value to me, I think. And I guess if there was one thing I wanted to say, if people are watching this, I really hope that people will go back and look at these meetings and tour the facilities when the opportunity is available, watch it on ECAT, really understand the value of doing this now. I think these are great questions. I loved your question about what happens if, can it be split up? And it would be such a huge missed opportunity, in my opinion. These decisions are very risky. People don't like change. It's a lot of money. But we've all seen the Doran Whittier study for years ago of how much it's going to cost to get these buildings just, workable. Those don't even account for what things are like over the next 50 years. These are really going to be a game changer for our community. And I'm just really pleased with the work and the great comments and the great questions from this committee. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Connor, maybe you could have the final thought, but I was going to ask you too, Connor, about what would a lease look like? You mentioned like a 75-year lease. What would that look like? I didn't know how that works as far as cost goes.
That would be speculative, so I don't know. And I don't want to get myself in trouble, but we'll see. I mean, you would need to incorporate, to the extent there are any costs of a lease, it would be an acquisition cost rolled into a project. So I think that for the committee's purposes in selecting one of the alternatives, whatever that number would be is going to be kind of a flat reality in all three of these choices, right? So it's a good question, but I don't have the answer yet. I mean, that's kind of part of the challenge with getting a really concrete cost number, is there's a wide kind of breadth of contingency and soft costs that's just not known yet. But as we go through the actual schematic design, the authorities for sale and the procurement pieces, a lot of these things will come into picture relatively quickly over the winter.
Yeah, no, I could appreciate that. And I mean, all three require the purchase of Daily Corner. So all three options we're looking at.
Right, and I think it's worth note that the option that was knocked out of contention, should Daily Corner not work out, which is Public Works on Center, there's other costs there that are not contemplated here, right? Decommissioning, cleanup of the site, things of that nature. Those may be things the town needs to address at some point down the road. Those are also items that we perhaps could roll into the sale of, if we end up not using Center Street DPW for anything after this process. To Dottie's point, all of these options create opportunity for us as a community in the future for sale or reuse of the parcels that we don't have a pretty clear cut continued public use for. So you could perhaps put cost of decommissioning on a buyer, depending on the relative value of the land and that type of thing. So there would be some soft costs that are just not known at this point, I think, under any scenario. But I do want to echo Dottie's point that if you do the consolidated option on 5B, that does kind of maximize the reuse or resale potential of what would be decommissioned municipal buildings. Not Station 2, Dan is right, but Station 3 and water on Bay Road in particular are contiguous large parcels, although I see on a GIS map a stream somewhere back there, which is shocking given it's Easton. So I don't know how much of it is developable, but these are relatively large parcels in a sewered development district that could be of significant value, either economically, commercially, housing, you name it. There's a lot of activity already happening in Five Corners, and 5B does get the most kind of opportunity in that area as well.
All right, thank you. It sounds like we have some pretty good consensus here as far as the options go. So I don't know if someone wants to make a motion to select as the preferred solution 5B to go forward with schematic design. If someone wanted to make a motion.
So move Stebbins.
Devin, do we have a-
Second, Carlson.
Okay, Carlson second. All right, so why don't we go to a roll call vote? Myself, yes. Joe?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Jackie?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And Jamie?
Yes.
All right. Unanimous consensus. That's good. That made it easy. And maybe going forward, Greg, do you want to kind of fill us in as far as what you see going forward, especially like as far as meetings go, frequency of meetings from the MBC?
Yeah, I mean, I'll defer to Chad on frequency and how many, but the design process will really come to fruition with Weston Sampson, Mitchell Associates, and Castle Booze. We'll really start developing the buildings on the sites that you've selected in full force to get you to the end of schematic design relatively quickly. And along the way, we'll check in at the meetings to give you updates on the design, obviously. And Chad, I'll defer to you on frequency and agenda type items.
Sure. So generally, when we kick off one of these design phases, there's a bit of regrouping, and we have to get the department head meetings and the end user meetings lined up, develop that material, and then once we have that material developed and there's an update, we can bring it back to the committee. So may not be necessary next month, but maybe shortly thereafter, we can resume the meetings and keep this group up to speed as we move through the schematic design process. One of the first deliverables in schematic design will be mapping out that work plan. So when those decisions need to happen, when the stakeholder meetings need to happen, and those generally tend to inform when the municipal building committee should meet, review, and then make key and critical decisions. So as we get to the tail end of this, we'll probably be back to a monthly or maybe even slightly more frequently, but generally that's what to expect over the next several months.
Great, thank you. So you're thinking probably nothing in October, probably nothing, maybe late November at the earliest. Is that what it is? I mean, we'll give everyone notice. I just wanted to get an idea.
That would be my best guess. Greg, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's going to take us a little bit of time to ramp up into the design of the buildings now. Obviously, with so many kind of variations of options, we haven't dug into those individual building designs quite yet. DPW stays fairly consistent across the options, but public safety moved around quite a bit. So as we're developing those, we'll really start to talk with department heads, make sure we have those end user meetings that Chad was talking about, and then bring back to you, relevant information for you to make decisions on based on our interaction with the departments and our knowledge of best practices and sticking to kind of the program and the site constraints.
All right, that sounds good. I think that was pretty much what we had on the agenda. Does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Before you do, I just want to plug and make sure everyone here knows town meetings November 14th, given the discussions we all just had. I will be looking for all of you there, and I am excited to see all of you. So 7 o'clock at OA on Monday, November 14th. We'd appreciate if you go.
Absolutely. Good point. Good point, Connor. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move, Stebbins.
Stebbins, do we have a second?
Second, Maloney.
Joe, all right. We do a roll call. Yes for me, Joe,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes,
Jackie,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
and Jamie.
Yes.
All right, great. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. It was great, and thanks for everyone who came by. So we're looks like we're off on a path. And I think it's going to be exciting. All
Thanks,
right, for your
everyone.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.